Okay, I'm back again just to give a little bit of advice for our Year 11 students who are doing their exam block test next week. And part of what they're doing is a paper 1 question, which includes both a part A and part B. But the advice here equally applies to students in Year 12 as well. And I've kind of intimated some of this advice before in some of my previous clips. Um, I'll give myself a plug on Old Bloke Economics on YouTube. You can look at some of those clips there to get a understanding of what I'm talking about. But specifically with this clip, just how can we use ChatGPT to generate some real-world examples that you can use as part of your Part B response in Paper 1. Out of the whole syllabus, this is the paper which causes the greatest amount of anxiety and consternation amongst students because they feel as though they've got to be on top of all the real world examples that cover the entire course. Now, that's a big ask. I think it's a very unrealistic ask set by the IB. I've got some views on that. I don't think they're I think it's something that could be changed in future syllabuses, but I'll leave that discussion for another clip or another time. But what we can do in the meantime is, okay, how can we use AI to kind of cut down the anxiety and cut down the amount of time that you would take to, find these real world examples. And I think this is one of the great things about using AI, because this, I believe, is a really ethical way of using it. It can really save you a lot of time, and when I think about it, it's really just an advanced Google search that cuts out a lot of steps and makes it pretty easy for you. Um, just using, I mean, you can use any kind of AI, but the one I've been using for the real world examples is ChatGPT. I also use Copilot because that's one we get through work, and that tends to be unlimited, whereas at the moment I'm on the free version of ChatGPT, so that kind of restricts the amount of prompts and iterations that you can use and functionality. Hopefully in time the school will pay for a complete subscription. I'm a bit too scabby to afford it myself, but maybe when I ease my way into semi-retirement, I might decide to pay the full amount and claim it as a tax deduction. Anyway, so you can see on the left-hand side there in the panel, um, I guess the GPTs I used to create these real-world examples is visible there. So I'll just get my cursor. Mariana is the one, she's aligned with IB Economics. And that's a very good one. That's probably the best one. But just recently I've been exploring the use of IB Economics RWE generator. So someone's created that and helps you to generate real world examples that can be useful for paper 1, and I just found it by clicking on explore, and then in the search function just wrote IB Economics. A whole list of them came up, and that one came up, and I thought, oh well, give that a crack, give that a try, see what happens. The art of using AI to be effective is the prompt. Now I'm just going to slide over on screen, and hopefully you can easily see the prompt there that I've given it. The more detailed it is, the better detail you receive. So you can see there initially I say, could you prepare for me a contemporary RWE? Now, contemporary just means more recent. Now, if I was you, you could actually specify a date. So for instance, thinking like this year, next year, contemporary might be from 2020 to 2026. And in this particular case, I've just based it on fiscal policy, given that I've just created a video showing you last year's paper where the Part B question was on fiscal policy and how it can be effective in dealing with unemployment. So what you can do is, again, go back to the subject guide, look at the AO3 questions, and use those AO3 questions or syllabus points to guide your prompt, okay, which is what I've done here in terms of using fiscal policy and how effective it may be in dealing with unemployment. I go on to say, could you present it using traditional bullet points, but as a mix of pros and stats to use for paper 1 part B exam? So I want a little bit of qualitative data and I want a bit of quantitative data, because ideally that will help you score better if you have a nice mix of the two. I say there, I don't need a lot, because obviously I'm not going to try to write a PhD on it. I just know a little bit of information, so I can blend it or integrate it into my response. And then I say, also give me some tips on how I would show this on a diagram. So it's not actually going to sketch you the diagram, but it's going to give you some steps of how to represent it using a diagram. And then give me some specific evaluation points of the effectiveness of the policy that are specific to the RWE that it will generate, okay? So, from your textbook or your study guide, you can find the evaluation points, the strengths and weaknesses of using fiscal policy, and that's just kind of a generic look at it. But what you want to score well is to have the apt evaluation points that support the real world example you're going to use in the exam. So if you think about it, it's like your IA. So with your IA, and most of you are doing it on monetary policy at the moment, there may be half a dozen strengths and weaknesses of monetary policy. You don't need to talk about all of them. What you need to do is talk about the ones which are relevant or visible in your article. And so transferring that understanding to the context of an exam, all you're needing to do here is to probably have 2 or 3 evaluation points on each side. So there's got to be balance, some negatives and positives, which are relevant or unique to the real world example you're going to use. Now, I also go on to say, could you please do the same where fiscal policy is not so effective? Okay? And that's because, as when I showed you that question earlier on in the previous clip, it's asking you for the effectiveness of fiscal policy. So what's implied is you need to also talk about where fiscal policy may not be effective in closing a recessionary gap. So again, in my mind, if you're prepping for next week, I go to the subject guide, I look at monetary policy and the evaluation around monetary policy, and then I would prompt, ChatGPT using this IB Economics Real World RWE generator to do something similar. Okay, so just quickly skimming it. So that's how I prompted it, and if you write a similar detailed prompt, you can, as I said, I would suggest you put some time frame in there just to narrow it down even better. You can see what it punches out for you based on the prompt. Okay, so it gives me an example there during COVID, the work scheme that the Germans used to stimulate their economy. You could have asked to do one on Australia if you wanted to. But you can see it's got a nice mix of bullet points there, just some brief facts to give you some background context of how it works. And then the effects on unemployment, because that's what the question is it effective in dealing with unemployment? Then it gives you some ideas of why it might be effective. And then it gives you some evaluation points, some limitations or weaknesses in, maybe where it's not so effective, or some of the costs associated with using fiscal policy to, close a recessionary gap in this instance. What's good too, it's got some stakeholder impacts, so the effects on particular groups and people. So remember, economics is in individuals and society. It's a humanity, so it's always really important, the impacts that it has on specific groups of people. Remember, you always want balance. You want groups of people who benefit, or maybe groups of people who don't benefit from a particular action or policy. So it's nice how that sets it up. Then the second point is where you've got a situation where the fiscal policy has not been so effective in reducing unemployment, because, as I said, that's the implied nature of the question. And again, you can see the bullet points that have been mentioned there, and it just follows a simple structural plan as we did in the first case. Then the third section just, looks at how you can represent these using a diagram. So if you're struggling to think how the real world example would look in a diagram, there's some advice there of how you can sketch the diagram and weave in or integrate the real world example as part of your diagram. And that's where, like I've said in previous clips, that's where I think you really score highly if the examiner can see you integrating your explanation with what's actually going on in your diagram. But it also creates some specific evaluation points to the RWEs we've asked it to create. Now, when you think about it and you look at all that, that's a lot to remember. And that's fine for one exam, if you know what the question is, but I'm thinking more about either in May or November when you've got 2 years of the entire subject to remember. You probably would want to trim that down a little bit further. And what I recommend is you do not do this in, October, November next year. You do this at the end of every topic or subtopic throughout the 2-year period. So, again, the process is open up the subject guide, go to AO3, look at the type of questions they can ask you in micro, macro, and global, and as you go along, just use the prompt that I've just showed on screen. I'll come back to it, or a variation of that, and it just punches out something, and you edit it down or whittle it down to a level which is understandable and relatable for you, and then stick it somewhere in a OneNote or in a file, and maybe every week you just revisit the real world examples, just skim read, and then over time hopefully it'll get hardwired in your brain. But like I said, don't overly stress out. If you integrate a real world example and you do a basic job, you're going to get somewhere between 9 and 12 out of 15. If you use a couple and do it in great detail, then you're pushing, towards that 13, 15 mark bracket. But ideally, we want you to get around 12 out of 15. If you pick up 8 out of 10 for part A, which is very doable, then you're sitting on that 20 out of 25, which is, right on that 7 mark for paper 1. So don't overdo it. Don't overthink it, because it really is diminishing returns. The amount of time you put in to, creating real world examples and then integrating them is, there's no huge benefit. So, but tick along and do it as you go through every syllabus point. It will make your life easier. I'd love to dedicate some time in class for you to do that, at the end of every topic. But the problem is, of course, is that AI, you can't access it while you're at school. So the onus is upon you to do it at home. But as you can see, it's pretty easy to do. Once you get your prompt right, you have a template for it, and then you just adapt it to the topic that you're looking at. And literally it takes a couple of minutes to do each week. So, it's good practice, good habit to do. Okay, so, year 11s, I've shown you how to do it. Now you've got to do your thing in terms of thinking about what we can ask you next week. Like I said, the money's around monetary policy. So, you can get your creative juices going. Use, ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever it is that takes your fancy in terms of AI to use, and go from there. But as you can see, the two that I would use for economics from ChatGPT is IB Economics RWE Generator and Mariana, which is the IB Economics Avatar that you can find. Okay, signing off. All the best for next week. Thinking about maybe next week I might do another video around the macro IA, given that what most of you have done, and just give some generic feedback around how to improve your writing for the final. As most of you know, I will be on long service leave first half of next year, so I won't be seeing you. So I might just do a little video during the course of next week just to put up on YouTube that you can watch. Okay, guys, all the best. Probably bump into you sometime next week too. Take care and have a good weekend.